Hello and welcome to IABM TV. I'm delighted to be joined by Bram Desmet, CEO of Flanders Scientific today. Flanders Scientific is a really interesting company developed around professional displays, and that's a topic that's new and particularly interesting for me. Bram, I'm going to ask you the first question, and it's going to be based around HDR, UHD and 4K, which are clearly of a lot of interest right now. But from your perspective, to what extent are you seeing adoption of HDR and 4K monitoring?
Yeah, well, so thanks for having me. And we certainly have seen that, 4K and HDR are of a lot of interest. They're certainly, the buzzwords out there. That being said, what we see in terms of monitor sales is that SDR is still going very strong. We sell a lot more SDR monitors than we do HDR monitors. So we try to keep that in perspective. Sometimes I think we can get a little bit lost in, the latest and greatest and forget where the bulk of the work is happening in the industry. So we try to cater to all needs. We have, very inexpensive monitors that are intended for, just basic, reliable, color accurate monitoring of broadcast signals, whether that's in a truck or in a control room or what have it. And then we do, high-end post-production displays for SDR mastering. We do the 4K monitoring as well. And we do think that the industry will move more and more that direction in the future. There'll be a lot more HDR adoption. The big challenge that we all face as an industry on HDR in general is not so much on the acquisition side. We've had great cameras for a long time. The challenge that we have, of course, is making these HDR displays affordable. And unfortunately, HDR displays are not that easy to make. And so the other thing is that, you don't sell millions of HDR displays because, again, the demand is not quite that high. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg type thing. There's not great, huge adoption, partly because of the price, and the price is high because there's not huge adoption. So that's kind of where we are with those.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I guess I do understand those market dynamics. I mean, in terms of Flanders Scientific specifically, you do offer a couple of different HDR monitoring solutions. Can you tell us a bit more about how these differ?
So absolutely. So we do offer a couple different options to meet different needs. I always try to tell people too that we have kind of two flagship monitors at the moment. We have the XM311K, which is what we call a light modulating cell layer or an LMCL panel. And then we have the XM310K, which uses a zone backlight system. And we try to tell people that, if we could have made just one or the other, we would have done it. Carrying two expensive displays and kind of confusing the decision for people was not our intention. But there are different needs out there, and we wanted to address both of those needs. So with the light modulating cell layer panel, what you have is essentially a backlight that's always on. You have a relatively standard LCD panel up front. It just has the red, green, blue filters that give you different colors of light. But then sandwiched in between that, you have essentially a monochromatic LCD layer. And what this does is it allows you to block out a lot more light. So you have this kind of multiplying effect of 1/1000 to 1 contrast ratio panel stacked on top of another 1,000 to 1 contrast ratio panel. And then you get essentially a 1,000,000 to 1 contrast ratio effectively when the light finally hits the user's eye. This is a great technology in a lot of respects in that there's no loading behavior, there's no halation, there's no flare, really no artifacts. You can imagine going through 2 levels of material, having your backlight always on, does consume a lot of power. You are limited to about 1,000 nits. There aren't really any light modulating cell layer panels currently that go much brighter. So while it does have some advantages, the cost, the power consumption, and also because you are going through those 2 layers and they're stacked and there's some depth to that stack, the off-axis viewing isn't quite as good, so you'll get a little bit more color shift, a little bit more contrast drop than you would on something that doesn't have to go through all those stacks. The other alternative is something like a zone backlight, and that's what we've done in our XM310K. And the reason we made that is that while a lot of the industry is happy at 1,000 nits, and a lot of deliverables are happening at 1,000 nits, standards like HLG and PQ do support light levels, obviously, that go way above that. And there are some people who were asking for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 nit deliverables, but there's really a huge lack of displays that can do this. So we set out with the XM310K to use the latest panel technology, the latest backlight technology available. And we created a unit that can do over 3,000 nits peak luminance. So this really allows you to grade at these much higher nit value levels. And if you ever do a side-by-side comparison, a lot of people say, well, is that really meaningful, 1,000 nits versus 3,000 nits? You only have to see them side-by-side once to go, oh, I get it. Yes, 3,000 nits can be very compelling. Now, obviously, that doesn't make a ton of sense if you don't have anybody asking for it, but there are facilities, there are companies out there who are starting to request grades higher than 1,000 nits. It becomes kind of a marketing advantage. It also makes it a little bit more future-proof because the industry is moving towards brighter and brighter displays. So we offer those two options. There's trade-offs with both. With a zone backlight system, you always have this, issue of having less zones than you have pixels. So halation, flare, motion artifacts are all very real considerations. And the quality of the display comes down to partly physics, how many zones do you have, and partly smarts, how good are the algorithms that drive the backlight and the LCD, how well do they match those up? And that's something that we've spent considerable effort on over the last, several years, 3 or 4 years, developing these algorithms and fine tuning them based on user feedback, based on our own research and things we've been able to do. And early this year, about March of this year, we actually released our latest iteration of those algorithms. And we've been really pleased with that performance. And for me personally now, comparing the two, I kind of prefer the zone backlight system because the 3,000 nits is compelling. And I think we've got the algorithms fine-tuned to a very good place right now. But again, for people who want something kind of simpler and where there's no chance of having any of those artifacts appear, you have the light modulating cell layer option. So I think you'll also see that the industry will see both of those technologies. I don't think there will be one clear winner for the foreseeable future.
Well, again, that's very interesting, and I guess that's listening to you, it's kind of what is the best about our industry. It's very specific, very professional, very technical companies like you working in tandem with the cutting edge part of the value chain of the broadcast and movie industry, delivering solutions that people want at the right time in the right place, and that's really great to hear. Let me ask you another question in terms of, are any of your displays designed for Dolby Vision mastering?
Yeah, absolutely. So both the 310K and 311K would qualify as Dolby Vision mastering monitors. Now, Dolby doesn't specifically certify specific displays, but what they do is they do offer a facility certification program. And within that facility certification program, you need to be able to hit certain benchmarks. You need to be able to do P3 color gamut. You need to be able to do PQ or ST2084 EOTF. You need to be able to hit at least 1,000 nits. And you need to have at least a contrast ratio of 200,000 to 1. Our XM310K can do about 3 million to 1, and our XM311K can do 1 million to 1. So both of those displays can be used for Dolby Vision mastering applications, and obviously also for HLG and for other standards. But yes, those two displays would qualify. Okay,
thank you. And I guess just dialing the cutting edge technology down just a little bit, as most HDR workflows also involve creating an SDR pass of the same material. Do you have any tips or best practices for the SDR monitoring of that content?
Yeah, so there's two approaches to this. One is to just use the same display. And so you can obviously use the XM311K or the XM310K and put it into an SDR mode. But there are some workflows like Dolby Vision where monitoring both of those kind of simultaneously and then being able to use trim controls for the SDR to fine tune the SDR version and have it kind of perceptually match the HDR, where that becomes kind of a situation where you do need both an SDR and an HDR monitor side by side. Now, it'd be great if everybody just bought 2 311Ks or 2 310Ks to do this, of course, but we realize that spending that much money for something dedicated to SDR is probably not what most facilities are going to do. So what we've learned, and we learned this several years ago, is that the best thing you can do for yourself is to try to use similar display technologies. So there's some people who may want to use like a 24.5-inch or 30-inch OLED monitor for the SDR, and then they want to use a light modulating cell layer for the HDR. The problem with that is that now you're throwing in a new variable into the equation, because now it's not just a difference of luminance, but it's also a fundamental difference of the light source. So this is getting a little techie, but the spectral distribution or the light output type of OLED and the light modulating cell layer or the 310K with the zone backlight are so different that even when they measure the same, they perceptually to most human eyes look a little bit differently. So you're dealing not with differences just based on luminance, but because of display technology types. And this can confuse the process a little bit. So something that we've worked to do is we have smaller monitors like our 17-inch and our 24-inch DM series monitors, DM240 and the DM170. That actually are SDR versions, so there's no dynamic backlight type algorithms, there's no dual panel. The backlight type is the same. So all of these units, the 310K, the 311K, the DM240, the DM170, all use a type of LED backlight that's called PFS phosphor LED, so PFS LEDs. What that means is that the spectral light output footprint is essentially identical on these, even though they're very different luminance levels. But if you put a 310K in SDR mode and you put a DM240 next to it, they'll match almost perfectly. You'll get a little bit higher contrast on the 310K because it is that HDR display with that higher contrast. But in terms of color perception, they're so similar that the SDR bit's going to look very, very much the same, as opposed to if you try to mix in a different display technology, whether that's a CRT or a OLED or something else. So offering that same backlight type, that PFS phosphor backlight across all these different models, I think has proved to be very effective for people who want to use, a $4,000 DM240 next to a $25,000 XM310K. And now the user, the colorist, can rest assured that the differences they're seeing are owed primarily to one being HDR and one being SDR, not one being HDR and one being SDR. Oh, and by the way, a completely different type of technology.
Absolutely, and Bram, never apologize for being techie. It's really interesting because you're explaining something very clearly that I think is a super important issue, to be honest. And you're absolutely right. When I talk to professionals in our industry, they want to eliminate variables as much as possible, and I think what you were saying makes a lot of sense. So coming back down to something that you mentioned earlier in terms of the nits level, as it were, 1,000 nits has kind of been the industry standard for a long time. Surely that's enough, right?
Well, so I think 1,000 nits was enough because it's all we could do. So the Dolby Pulsar was really the only display out there that people could really get their hands on that could reliably do over 1,000 nits. Well, the issue being you couldn't even buy that. It was a basically lease only type option. There weren't that many out there. People are often surprised at how few of those there actually exist. So yeah, I think that became became kind of a de facto standard just because there was nothing else available. Now, a lot of people are happy at 1,000 nits. The Netflixes of the world are asking primarily, is 1,000 nits as your baseline standard. That's what they would like. But what a lot of these companies are doing is, especially the streaming players like Apple and Netflix, they are accepting deliverables that are mastered over 1,000 nits. And in some original content cases with some of these companies, they are specifically asking for masters that are at 3,000 or 4,000 or sometimes down to 2,000 nits. So you are seeing this growing trend of wanting to do this. And the reason these companies are doing it is because on the consumer landscape, being able to market yet another number or another competitive advantage is going to become very attractive to the consumer television manufacturers. So they're going to say, well, our TV is 2 times or 3 times or 4 times brighter. So you've already seen that some of these consumer TVs are getting up to 2,000 nits or more. And that trend is only going to continue. And the content providers out there are aware of this and want their content to be able to shine on these TVs. So it's been enough for now, but there are a lot of people who are taking this kind of growing trend for requesting deliverables over 1,000 nits into account when they're buying monitors. And so they may not need over 1,000 nits today, but they look at something like the 310K and go, okay, well, this makes me a lot more future proof because I can go 3 times brighter if I need to. So yeah, it's a tough question to answer. You know, we always tell people, you know, it has largely been enough. And for almost all these companies, they're not going to reject your content because you're only able to master 1,000 nits, at least currently. But there are these growing number of exceptions where they're like, hey, this would be great if we could get a 2,000 or 4,000 nit master of this.
Well, thank you. And as you say, it's a trend, and it's a key thing to future-proof your investment, I guess. Yep. So kind of staying on that in terms on that theme of trends, as it were, how do you see HDR, 4K, and UHD monitoring evolving over the coming years?
So I think there are going to be a few evolutions that I think are going to be really helpful for the industry. One thing that I should say from the outset is that I don't think there's going to be one dominant display technology type. I think you're going to see zone backlight, you're going to see light modulating cell layer, you're probably going to see some new versions of OLED. You're going to see in the long term other technologies like micro LED come to market. But one of the short-term benefits we're going to see, I think, pretty soon is that full array local dimming, the zone backlight systems like the XM310K. You're going to see more options in that sort of range that are going to offer 2 important evolutions. One is that costs are likely going to come down. And we've seen this happen already on the 310K. When the 310K came out, it was originally a $45,000 monitor. And that's because the market for these was really small. We were making them in very small quantities. As the momentum has picked up on displays like this, we've been able to bring that down all the way down to $25,000. So the price has really improved on those. And I think you'll continue, maybe not on the 310K specifically, but as a general evolution in full array local dimming, I think you'll start to see more and more affordable options. I think that's something that the industry is really looking for. The other evolution will be brighter and brighter displays. So right now, most things outside of the 310K currently, as of today, this will probably be wrong by tomorrow, but as of today, it's the brightest commercially available professional HDR monitor out there. Most of the other full array local dimming, the zone backlight systems, are still only 1,000 nits or so. I think you're going to see a trend of those getting brighter and brighter as well. So that's the second evolution you'll see just among the zone backlight systems. And then with light modulating cell layer, I think the problem that we have there is that pricing remains quite expensive. And one of the key difficulties with the light modulating cell layer is making it smaller, because you have to align these 2 panels, this front panel and this middle panel, very, very precisely. That's a difficult process to do. And you can, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with very high resolution and you keep making this smaller and smaller, the level of precision has to keep increasing. So I think that that's going to be a challenge there. So I think we'll see more of those light modulating cell layer options, but perhaps at larger sizes. So maybe you'll see 50-inch and plus versions of this available, simply because it's easier to do there. And then I think there's some clever companies out there that will probably try to meld the 2 options. So you may have something that has both a zone backlight system and a light modulating cell layer to try to get the best of both worlds. Those might be hyper expensive systems though. And then the other evolutions, like I mentioned, are going to be these new technologies on the horizon. I think a lot of people are excited about micro LED. It kind of has, in theory at least, a lot of the benefits of light modulating cell layer, and that it's per pixel accuracy. It's very similar to OLED in that it's an emissive technology, so you don't have halation or flare, these things to worry about. But unlike OLED, it's not susceptible to burn-in and things like this. Problem with it now is it's very difficult to make. It's extraordinarily expensive. So most of the micro LED you see now are the size of walls. They're cinema-sized displays that are measured in feet, not inches, and they're also upwards of $1 million. So not the type of thing that most facilities are going to use. But that will continue to scale down. I think we'll continue to see an evolution there. There are a lot of people who I think incorrectly expect that you're going to see 24 and 30-inch versions of that in the next 6 to 12 months. I don't think it's going to happen. I think you're going to see is probably something that's 3 to 5 years out, best case scenario. So you're going to have all these different options, and for a while there, back in before HDR really took off, I think everybody was like, "Hey, OLED's becoming this dominant thing, and we're all kind of standardizing on it, and this is going to be a beautiful thing that we don't have to worry about all these different display technologies." That's been completely blown apart by HDR, and I think you're going to see more and more variety, not less. So there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening in terms of options available to people. So something to keep your eye on, and we certainly are. We're not committed to just one type of technology, as you see with the 310 and 311. We also have some 55 and 65-inch OLED monitors. So we try to use the best available things out there, build good products around them, and let the industry kind of guide us as to what's working for them and what's not working for them.
Thanks, Bram. Thanks for sharing your insight into the future of professional reference monitors and displays, and I certainly understand that that's that one of the, I guess, key selling points for Flanders Scientific is that you listen to your customers and you try and give them what they want, which is the secret to great business. So that's really good to hear too. Before we disappear, because we're kind of running out of time, I know that your product range is quite diverse and you've been talking about the top end so far. But what about more affordable HDR monitoring solutions?
I think those are coming, and we also kind of have, we don't like to oversell products in terms of capability, right? So we try to be very pragmatic and tell people honestly the limitations of devices. But one thing that we do have is on those 55 and 65-inch OLED monitors, there are what we call HDR preview modes. So they're not mastering level modes. I wouldn't use them to grade your Netflix feature on, and they won't pass muster for Dolby Vision, facility certification as your primary reference monitor. But those are available at a fraction of the cost. So 11,000 US will get you into one of those, and they do have an HDR mode. And there are people who are doing kind of maybe lower level, whether it's corporate or local regional or online HDR work on these displays. So it's not, something we pitch very hard, but we have people using those. So that's one solution that's out there now. And then as mentioned, I do think that with the full array local dimming zone backlight systems out there, we'll see options in the future that will help bring the cost down on those. As the industry starts to adopt that technology more and more, I think that we'll see more and more affordable options for HDR monitoring in general. And again, we've already seen that trend on the 310 and the 311 for that matter. Both of those units are a good $20,000 less expensive than when they were first released. And that's just something that comes with broader adoption of the technology.
Bram, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.